The Erebus hung in the inky expanse of space, a solitary sentinel orbiting the shattered remains of a mining colony. Captain Mara Vauban stood on the bridge, her gaze fixed on the holographic display that dominated the room. Blue light flickered across her face, casting sharp shadows as the faint distress signal pulsed with eerie regularity. It was a call from the past, a whisper of a forgotten era. "Captain, the signal's origin has been triangulated," reported Lieutenant Aidan Clark, the ship's tactical officer. His voice carried a mix of tension and excitement. "It's coming from an abandoned sector near the Halian Drift. Records show no active settlements or stations there for over 3 centuries." Mara leaned forward, her gloved hand resting on the edge of the console. 3 centuries. The Concordium's collapse. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of history. This could be the proof we'd been searching for. The bridge fell silent. Every officer knew what the Concordium had once been. A beacon of unity among the galaxy's species, a bulwark against chaos. And they knew what had followed its collapse: centuries of war, devastation, and isolation. For humanity, stranded on a dying Earth, hope had long since become a rare commodity. "Captain," said Chief Engineer Lena Morov, her tone cautious, "if it's a Concordium beacon, there's no guarantee it's still functional. We might be chasing ghosts." Mara turned to face her crew, her dark eyes sharp and resolute. "Maybe. But if there's even a chance that this signal can lead us to the truth, to a way to restore what we've lost, we owe it to every person back home to pursue it." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. They trusted Mara. Her leadership had saved them time and again. But this mission felt different. Riskier. "Helm, plot a course for the signal's source," Mara ordered, her voice firm. "Engage the slipstream drive." The ship thrummed as the engines roared to life. The stars outside the viewport stretched and blurred, and the Erebus leaped into the void. Hours later, the ship emerged from slip space, dropping into a system drenched in the cold light of a dying star. The signal was louder now, its cadence steady and unchanging. It guided them to a desolate orbit around a shattered moon. "Captain," Aidan called out, his voice tight, "we have visual on the source of the signal." On the main display, a massive station loomed, its spires broken and jagged. Once, it had likely been a hub of activity, its walls gleaming with Concordium banners. Now it was a ghost, its hull scarred and pitted by centuries of neglect. "Scan for life signs," Mara commanded. "None detected," Aidan replied. "But there's power. Minimal, but enough to sustain the beacon." "Looks like we found our ghost," Lena muttered. Mara straightened. "Prep a boarding party. Whatever's in there, we're going to find out why it's calling us after all this time." The crew braced themselves. The hunt for the truth had begun. The Erebus docking clamps hissed as they secured to the derelict station. Outside the viewport, the broken spires of the Concordium outpost loomed like ancient sentinels, their fractured forms casting ominous shadows against the dim light of the dying star. Captain Mara Vauban adjusted her helmet, the HUD flickering to life as it synchronized with her suit's systems. "Stay sharp," she instructed her boarding team. "This station may be abandoned, but I don't trust anything that's lasted 3 centuries out here." Lieutenant Aidan Clark, armed and ready, gave her a nod. "Understood, Captain. If anything moves, it won't for long." The boarding hatch opened with a groan, revealing a corridor choked with darkness. The team's helmet lamps pierced through the gloom, revealing walls etched with the faded insignia of the Concordium. Dust particles floated in the vacuum, undisturbed for centuries. "Power levels are minimal," reported Chief Engineer Lena Morov as she scanned the area with her handheld device. But the beacon is still active. Something's keeping this place alive. Alive might be the wrong word, muttered Corporal Dax, one of the security officers. The group moved cautiously, their steps echoing faintly through the station's metallic husk. They passed rows of shattered terminals and dormant machinery, each a silent testament to a bygone age. "Captain," Aiden said, his voice tense, "we've got movement up ahead." The team froze, weapons raised. Mara squinted at her HUD, which displayed faint blips of motion further down the corridor. "Could be debris," Lena suggested, but her tone betrayed her doubt. "Or it could be worse," Aiden countered. Mara signaled for silence and motioned for the team to move forward. As they rounded a corner, they found the source, a cluster of small, insect-like drones scuttling across the walls. Their chassis were battered and corroded, but their movements were precise and purposeful. "Automated defenses," Mara muttered. "Ancient, but still functional." The drones turned, their optics glowing a menacing red. "Engage," Aiden barked. The corridor erupted in flashes of light and sound as the team opened fire. The drones retaliated, firing energy bolts that ricocheted off the walls. Mara ducked behind a terminal, returning fire with precision. One by one, the drones fell, their shattered remains scattering across the floor. "Everyone okay?" Mara called out once the skirmish ended. "Minor burns, nothing serious," Lena replied, clutching her arm. Mara glanced at the remains of the drones. If these defenses are still active, this station might not be as abandoned as it looks. As they pressed on, the beacon grew louder, its rhythmic pulse reverberating through the station. They finally reached the control room, where a single console glowed faintly in the darkness. "Captain," Lena said, her voice trembling. "The beacon's message. It's a warning." Mara frowned. "A warning about what?" Before Lena could respond, the station shuddered violently. "Captain," Aiden shouted, his voice panicked. "We've got company. Varnock ships just dropped out of warp. They are headed straight for us." Mara's jaw tightened. "Get back to the Erebus. Whatever's in this station, the Varnock don't want us to have it." The crew sprinted back toward the docking bay, the station groaning around them as it came to life with defensive countermeasures. The hunt for the past had awakened an enemy that would stop at nothing to ensure humanity's silence. The Erebus pulled away from the broken station just as Varnock warships entered the system, their ominous forms cutting through the void like shadows in the dark. Captain Maravalin stood at the bridge's command center, her gaze fixed on the starfield ahead. The team had returned, shaken but intact, clutching fragmented data from the abandoned Concordium station. It was enough to confirm one thing. The Varnock Dominion was hunting the same relics of the past. "Plot a course to Zayara Prime," Mara ordered, her voice cold and focused. "We need allies, and the Zayari may be our best bet. Their archives might hold more answers about the Concordium's fall." The ship's engines hummed as the Erebus made the jump, leaving the dying system behind. As they travelled, Mara couldn't shake the feeling that the Varnock were always one step ahead. The attack on the station was no coincidence. They knew what humanity had discovered, and they were determined to stop it. Upon arrival, Zayara Prime was nothing like what Mara had imagined. The planet was a lifeless husk, its surface a barren wasteland of cracked continents and dust storms. Once a jewel of the Concordium, the Zayari had flourished here, building towering cities that touched the clouds. Now only scattered orbital colonies remained, floating in artificial habitats that glowed faintly in the dark. The Zayari had retreated from the rest of the galaxy centuries ago, their once mighty civilization splintered by civil war and the eventual betrayal of the Concordium. Their memories of the Alliance were bitter, and few had the will to revisit those painful days. "We're cleared to dock," Aiden announced, his voice tinged with caution. "There's a welcoming committee waiting for us." Mara nodded. "Prepare the team. We can't afford to waste time." As the Erebus descended into Zayari Prime's orbit, the crew found themselves under the watchful eyes of the Zayari people. The Aryan race was tall and lithe, their skin a shimmering silver blue, their eyes glowing with an inner light. They wore elaborate ceremonial armor, blending elegance with a deadly grace. Their once legendary fleets and armies were now nothing more than whispers in the wind. The Zayari Council had agreed to meet with Mara and her crew, but as the meeting began, the tension was palpable. The council chamber was a grand hall, its walls adorned with ancient murals depicting the rise and fall of the Concordium. Yet there was an unmistakable wariness in the air, as if the Zayari were watching for any sign of betrayal. "We have come to discuss an important matter," Mara began, standing before the council. "The Varnock Dominion threatens us all. We have reason to believe that the Concordium's downfall was no accident, and humanity is seeking to rebuild the Alliance, if you're willing to join us." A hush fell over the room. The Zayari Council leader, an elder named Leora, stepped forward, her voice steady but sharp. "You speak of restoring an empire long dead, Captain. The Concordium was a failed dream, and humans were not the only ones who were betrayed. We've spent centuries recovering from that wound. Why should we risk it again?" Mara's gaze hardened. "Because if we don't unite, we will fall, one by one. The Varnock will crush us all, and there will be nothing left but dust." Leora studied her, a faint spark of curiosity in her glowing eyes. "And what makes you think humanity is capable of leading such an alliance? Your kind has only known war and destruction. We were the ones who held the peace." Before Mara could respond, a sharp, panicked voice echoed from the door. "Captain." Lieutenant Aiden burst into the chamber, his face pale with fear. "Varnock ships are on the move. They've entered the system, and they're heading straight for Zayara Prime." The council's attitude shifted in an instant. There was no more time for words. Mara turned back to Leora, her voice unwavering. "We don't have much time. Will you stand with us, or will you watch your people fall?" Leora hesitated, her gaze lingering on the young captain who had somehow brought a spark of hope into a galaxy drowning in despair. Finally she spoke. "We will fight with you, Captain, but understand this. If the Zayari return to war, there will be no turning back." As the council murmured in agreement, Mara's heart raced. The fragile alliance had begun. But with the Varnock closing in, the true test was about to begin. The decision to fight was made. Zayara's fleet, once one of the most formidable in the galaxy, had been restored to full readiness, their long-dormant ships revived and upgraded by the combined ingenuity of the Erebus crew and the Zayari engineers. But while the alliance was gaining strength, time was slipping away. The Varnock were coming, and Mara knew they had to act quickly. The Erebus' next destination was Corellia, a once prosperous world now enslaved by the Varnock Dominion. Corellia had long been a jewel of technological innovation, a place where artificial intelligence and organic biology had fused into unimaginable creations. But now its people labored in the Varnock's iron grip, forced to build weapons and machines of war for their oppressors. Mara's plan was to strike deep within the heart of the Varnock's operation, liberate the Corellian workers, destroy the Dominion's supply lines, and rally the people to the cause of the new alliance. As the Erebus entered Corellia's orbit, Mara stood on the bridge, her eyes scanning the incoming data. The planet's surface was a bleak landscape of industrial sprawl, massive factories pumping out weapons and ships for the Dominion war machine. "We've only got one shot at this," Mara said, her voice grim. "We'll hit them hard and fast. No time for second chances." Lieutenant Aidan Clark nodded, his fingers flying across the tactical controls. "We've identified a vulnerable sector, Captain. There's a processing plant here, guarded by a Varnock battalion. If we can disable it, we'll cut off their supplies, and the people of Corellia might finally have a chance to rise up." "We're going in hot," Mara replied. "Prepare the team. We'll need to get in, disable the plant's power core, and make our way to the control center before the Varnock can mount a full-scale counterattack." The team deployed under the cover of night, hidden by the planet's thick industrial smog. Mara led the charge, a small elite squad of Ziyari and Corellian rebels moving swiftly through the shadows. The air was thick with the smell of oil and burning metal, and the sound of distant machinery echoed like a death knell. As they approached the processing plant, the first wave of Varnock's soldiers appeared, armored and alert. "We've got a patrol coming in," Corporal Dax reported, his voice low. Mara signaled for silence. The plan was simple. Hit hard, hit fast, and hit first. As the Varnock soldiers approached, Mara's team opened fire, their weapons silent but deadly. In a flurry of motion, the rebels cut down the guards, taking them by surprise. But they knew this wouldn't last. The Dominion would send reinforcements the moment they were discovered. "We're in," Aidan reported as the door to the plant's main power room slid open. The air inside was stifling, the hum of energy pulsing from the reactor core. The team quickly split into two groups, one to sabotage the power core, the other to provide cover. Just as Mara was about to enter the core room, an explosion shook the building. The facilities alarm blared, and flashing red lights flooded the area. "They've found us," Lena shouted. "We need to move now." A fierce firefight erupted in the hallways, with Ziyari soldiers holding their ground against the incoming Varnock reinforcements. Mara sprinted toward the control center, her mind focused on one thing. They had to shut the plant down before the Dominion could retaliate. When they reached the control room, it was chaos. The Dominion soldiers had already fortified the area, and the room was filled with Varnock elite troops, dangerous, ruthless, and heavily armed. "Cover me," Mara shouted as she dove toward the control console. A hail of gunfire followed her, but the rebels returned fire, forcing the Varnock back. "Power core is down," Aidan reported over the comms. "We've got less than 5 minutes before the whole place goes critical." Mara's heart raced. "We're not leaving until we finish what we started." With a final push, the rebels fought their way to the heart of the facility, smashing through the last lines of resistance. As the plant's reactors began to overload, the Varnock forces retreated, but the damage had already been done. The facility erupted in a massive explosion, sending a shockwave across the planet's surface. Mara and her team barely made it out of the blast radius, but they were alive, and they had completed their mission. The Corellian workers, once prisoners, now looked to the sky with a sense of hope that, for the first time in centuries, their people might be free. As the team made their way back to the Erebus, Mara could see the first signs of revolt stirring across Corellia. The Dominion's grip was loosening. The rebellion was beginning. The days following the liberation of Corellia were a blur of chaos and triumph. The explosion had been a catalyst, igniting a wave of uprisings across the planet. The workers who had once toiled under the Varnock's yoke now took up arms, fighting for their freedom. In the wake of their victory, Mara and her crew received word from other systems. Rumors of rebellion sparking, of planets once silenced by the Dominion now standing up against their oppressors. Humanity and the Zayari had not just awakened hope in the hearts of the Corellians, they had set a fire that was spreading across the galaxy. Back aboard the Erebus, Mara convened a meeting with her senior officers. The bridge was quieter than usual, the hum of the ship's engines the only sound filling the room. But Mara could see the wariness in her crew's eyes. They had won battles, but the war was far from over. "We've made progress," Mara said, her voice steady, "but we can't slow down. The Varnok won't let Corellia's rebellion spread without retaliation. We have to move quickly, strike at their supply lines, and weaken their hold on the galaxy. This isn't just about winning one planet. It's about breaking their grip on the entire sector." Lieutenant Aidan Clark, who had become one of her most trusted allies, spoke up. "I've been tracking Varnok fleet movements. They're consolidating forces, preparing for a counteroffensive. If we don't hit them hard before they regroup, we risk losing all the ground we've gained." Mara nodded. "We're running out of time. Let's make it count. Aidan, I need you to coordinate with our Zayari allies. I want to know everything about their defenses, where their fleets are stationed, and what resources we can use for the next phase." "I'll get on it," Aidan replied, tapping commands into his console. Chief Engineer Lena Morov, always the pragmatist, interjected. "Captain, we need to make sure our ships are ready. The Erebus took damage in that last skirmish, and while we've got repairs underway, we're pushing the limits on para-reserves. If we're going to hit the Varnok stronghold, we need our ships to be at full strength." Mara turned to Lena, her eyes narrowing. "Can we speed up repairs?" Lena didn't hesitate. "We'll have to take some shortcuts, but we can make it work. It'll be tight, but we'll be ready." Mara knew Lena was right. There was no room for error. The Erebus was their lifeline, and without it, the rebellion would lose its spearhead. But with the Varnok regrouping and new threats emerging, every moment they spent in port was a risk. "We don't have the luxury of time," Mara said, "but we'll make do. Once we're fully operational, we'll strike. Our next target is the Varnok supply hub on Viral, one of their largest fuel depots in the sector. If we hit that, we'll cripple their fleet's mobility." The room fell silent for a moment as everyone absorbed the weight of the plan. A fuel depot was a critical target, but it was also heavily guarded. "Captain," said Dax, one of the most experienced security officers, "I'll lead a team to infiltrate the facility. We'll need precision and the element of surprise. The Varnok won't let us get close without a fight." "We'll need more than just force," Mara replied. "We'll need the locals to help us. The Varnok are everywhere on Viral, but there are underground movements. I want to make contact with them." Our officers nodded. The next phase of the rebellion would require coordination between the fleet and the planets they were fighting to liberate. They had to strike with both military precision and the support of those who lived under the Varnok's rule. As the Erebus prepared for the journey to Viral, Mara stood alone in the bridge, staring out into the vast emptiness of space. The fire of rebellion burned brighter than ever, but with each victory, the stakes grew higher. The Varnok were ruthless, and their retaliation would be swift. Mara knew that this next mission could turn the tide in the war, or break them. But the fires of rebellion had already been lit, and there was no turning back now. They would fight. Together. For freedom. For the galaxy. For the future. The Erebus entered the Viral system under the cover of darkness, the planet below a swirling mass of thick clouds and violent storms. Viral was a world of extremes, intense heat, powerful winds, and dangerous terrain. Its surface was home to vast fuel reserves, which the Varnock had turned into a critical hub for their war efforts. Mara stood on the bridge, her eyes scanning the swirling clouds below. Viral was a planet that lived in constant turmoil, a fitting backdrop for the mission ahead. The fuel depot they were targeting was located deep in one of the planet's largest volcanic craters. It was heavily fortified, surrounded by layers of automated defenses and Varnock troops. A direct assault would be disastrous. "We've got one shot at this," Mara said, her voice calm but resolute. "Our objective is clear. Destroy the depot's fuel reserves, cripple their fleet, and make sure we leave no trace behind. Dax, you'll lead the infiltration team." Dax, the veteran soldier, nodded sharply. "Understood, Captain. We'll hit them from the blind spot. We've got the local resistance on our side, but this won't be easy." "Just make sure the locals are ready," Mara replied. "We need them to strike when we give the signal. Timing is everything." Aidan Clark, standing at his station, turned to her. "I've been monitoring Varnock communications. They're on high alert, but they don't know we're here yet. If we move fast, we can catch them off guard. We'll need to disrupt their communications to keep them off balance," Lena Morov added, her voice steady. "I'll work with the Ziyari tech teams to scramble their systems. It should give Dax's team enough time to plant the charges." "Then we move in," Mara said, eyes narrowing with determination. "We strike hard, we strike fast, and we vanish before they can retaliate." The infiltration team dropped onto Viral's surface under the cover of storm clouds, their landing craft crashing through the turbulent atmosphere before touching down in a desolate ravine. The Karelian rebels, familiar with the planet's treacherous geography, led the way through the maze of volcanic rock and ash. The air was thick with smoke from constant eruptions, the ground beneath their feet trembling with the violent movements of the planet's crust. Dax's team, equipped with advanced cloaking tech and thermal suppression gear, moved like shadows through the darkness. They had to be careful. Every Varnock soldier stationed at the depot knew the planet's environment could kill just as quickly as the Dominion's weapons. "We've got eyes on the perimeter," Dax whispered into the comms, his voice barely audible. 5 guards, rotating every 10 minutes. If we move fast, we can neutralize them before they even know what hit them. Mara's voice came through, calm and commanding. "Proceed with caution, Dax. We need to disable the depot's security grid before we make our move." As Dax and his team advanced, Lena worked from the Erebus, hacking into the Varnock's network to bring their surveillance systems offline. The clock was ticking, but with the team's expertise and the Zayari's hacking skills, the defenses were slowly beginning to falter. "We're in," Lena said, her voice sharp as she bypassed the last of the security protocols. "You've got a green light for the explosives." Dax signaled his team, and in a series of swift movements, they planted charges around the depot's fuel storage tanks. But just as they were preparing to retreat, a distant sound reached their ears, a low, rumbling noise. The Varnock were onto them. "Ambush!" Dax barked, and the team immediately took cover. Varnock reinforcements had arrived, and they weren't taking prisoners. The air was filled with the crackle of blaster fire as Dax's team fought to hold their ground. The local resistance joined the fray, rushing from the shadows to overwhelm the Varnock troops. The air crackled with energy as explosions lit up the night sky. "We've got incoming from all sides," Dax growled, his rifle steady in his hands. "We need a diversion, now." Lena's voice came through the comms. "Stand by, team. I'm triggering the seismic disruptor in 3, 2, 1. The ground beneath the Varnock forces shuddered a series of violent tremors rocking the area. The seismic disruptor Lena had deployed went off, destabilizing the surrounding volcanic fissures. Lava erupted from cracks in the ground, and the Varnock were thrown into disarray. "Move! Move! Move!" Dax shouted as the team raced toward their extraction point. The Varnock soldiers were scattered, but they were far from defeated. The blast from the seismic disruptor had opened a rift in the terrain, and the team used the chaos to slip through the cracks and disappear into the ravine. Behind them, the fuel depot erupted in a massive fireball, sending shockwaves through the planet's surface. The Varnock supply lines were crippled, and the flames could be seen from orbit, a symbol of the rebellion's growing strength. The Erebus ascended back into the sky, its crew exhausted but victorious. As they left Viral's surface behind, Mara looked out at the fiery horizon, knowing that this was only the beginning. The rebellion was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, victory seemed within their grasp. The victory at Viral had been a resounding success. The Dominion's fleet was temporarily crippled, and word of the rebellion spread like wildfire across the galaxy. The Corellian people, emboldened by their newfound freedom, were fighting back fiercely against the Varnock on their homeworld. But Mara knew that the true test of their alliance had yet to come. The Varnock were relentless, and they would not take this blow lightly. Back aboard the Erebus, Mara stood in the war room, staring at the holographic map that flickered before her. The galaxy was a vast battlefield, and they were surrounded on all sides by the Varnock war machine. Their forces were scattered, but the Dominion's leadership was swift to regroup. "We've taken down one of their major supply depots, but the Varnock are still in control of the sector," Aidan Clark said, his voice low as he scanned the latest intelligence reports. "They're regrouping near Sifrax. If we don't strike soon, they'll be able to retake everything we've won." Mara's gaze was steely as she leaned over the map. Sifrax was a key location, one of the Varnock's central shipyards and military headquarters in the region. If they could take Sifrax, it would send a devastating blow to the Varnock's war effort. But it would also be the most dangerous mission they had ever undertaken. "We can't afford to wait," Mara said, her voice resolute. "We need to hit them where it hurts. A direct assault on Sifrax will be costly, but it's the only way to cripple their control over the sector. We'll need to strike from all directions, both in space and on the ground." Leonimorov, standing near the console, nodded in agreement. "I can't promise you a smooth ride, Captain. The Varnock know we're coming. We'll face heavy resistance, especially on the surface. But if we can get a foothold in their central command hub, we might be able to disrupt their communications and launch a full-scale offensive." "We're not going in blind," Mara said, turning to the rest of the team. "Dax, you'll lead the ground assault. You'll be infiltrating their command center and planting the disruptors. Aidan, I need you to coordinate with our fleet. We'll be hitting them from all sides, but our window of opportunity is narrow." "Aye, Captain," Dax replied, his voice cold and determined. "We'll make sure they never know what hit them. We'll need to work quickly," Mara added, "before the Varnock can mobilize their wraiths." The room fell silent at the mention of the wraiths, the elite special forces of the Varnock Dominion. They were the stuff of nightmares, swift, silent, and deadly. No one had ever seen them in action and lived to tell the tale. The wraiths were their most feared weapon, capable of infiltrating enemy ranks, silencing entire battalions, and vanishing without a trace. The wraiths had been sent after Mara and her crew before, on Corellia, in the aftermath of their sabotage mission, and they would be hunting them again, no doubt. "They'll be expecting us," Aidan said, his voice tight with apprehension. We'll need a diversion, something to keep them off our scent. Mara nodded. We'll hit their defenses with everything we've got. It's a calculated risk, but it's our only option. As the team prepared for the mission, the weight of what was to come pressed heavily on Mara's shoulders. The Erebus was their sword, and the rebellion was their shield, but they would be up against the full might of the Varnock Dominion. The night before their assault, Mara stood alone on the bridge, looking out at the stars. It was the calm before the storm, and her mind was a whirlwind of calculations. Each move they made, every decision they took, could mean life or death, for her crew, for their allies, for the future of humanity. The Varnock were powerful, but Mara had seen what they were capable of, what they could become when united, when fighting for something greater than themselves. They were more than a fleet. They were the spark of a new era. And they would not let the Varnock extinguish that spark. The Erebus dropped out of hyperspace above Sci-Fi, the planet's surface shrouded in storm clouds. The Varnock were ready, but so were they. The time for hesitation was over. The mission was a go. The war for the galaxy had truly begun. The final assault on Sifrax was a brutal and decisive operation. The Erebus had dropped out of hyperspace, and the battle for the Varnock stronghold had begun in full force. The planet's surface was a seething mass of military fortifications, craggy mountains, and sprawling industrial complexes, all vital to the Varnock's war machine. Yet Mara knew that this planet, this hub of Dominion power, was the key to everything. If they could bring it down, they would strike a blow that would reverberate throughout the entire galaxy. Mara stood once again on the bridge of the Erebus, her eyes scanning the chaos unfolding on the holoscreen before her. Her fleet was positioned in a defensive formation, every ship prepared to defend the Erebus and engage in the space battle that would determine the fate of their mission. But she knew the real fight was below the clouds, on the surface, where Dax's team was already on the ground. "Dax, status report," Mara said, her voice sharp, cutting through the tension that had settled across the command deck. "We're in," Dax responded, his tone calm, despite the deadly mission. "We've breached the outer perimeter. The Varnock forces are dug in, but we've got the element of surprise. We'll hit the central command hub first and disable their security systems. Then we plant the charges and get out." "Understood. Stay sharp," Mara replied. "Aiden, how are we looking up here?" Aiden's voice was grim as he ran calculations. "Their fleet is assembling for a counterattack. We're facing heavy resistance. They've got at least 5 dreadnoughts in orbit. Our window to break their command structure is closing. We'll need to give Dax's team more time," Mara said, her eyes narrowing. "Initiate a full offensive. I want everything we've got hitting Sifrax. We're not going to let them regroup." The battle in space was vicious. The Erebus and its fleet engaged the Varnock dreadnoughts with precision strikes, targeting weak points in their shields and weapon systems. Explosions erupted across the void as smaller ships maneuvered through the fray, darting in and out of the Varnock's fire. But despite the chaos in the skies, Mara's mind never left the surface of Sifrax. On the ground, Dax and his team moved through the ruins of the command hub's outer defenses, their cloaking tech keeping them hidden from prying Varnock eyes. The air was thick with the stench of burning metal and the deafening sounds of distant explosions. They had reached the heart of the facility, a massive complex built deep within the planet's crust. "This is it," Dax muttered as he gestured for his team to spread out. "We take the control center, and we'll send them a message they won't forget." The plan was simple but dangerous. Infiltrate the central command hub, disable its communication array, and plant explosives on the main reactor core. Once the charges were set, it would only be a matter of minutes before the entire complex went up in flames. But even with the advantage of surprise, the Varnock were formidable opponents. "We've got company," Lena's voice crackled over the comms. "A whole battalion is moving in. They must have detected our entry." Dax cursed under his breath. "We can't let them stall us. Hold your ground, and make sure those charges are in place. We've got 5 minutes, tops." As the Varnock soldiers closed in, the team fought back with everything they had. Blaster fire streaked through the air as the rebels, backed by Corellian insurgents, held their position and fought fiercely. But the Varnock were relentless. Their soldiers trained for this kind of warfare. "We've got the charges in place," Dax yelled. "Get ready to move out." Just as they prepared to retreat, a group of Varnock wraiths, elite assassins, emerged from the shadows. They moved like ghosts, their weapons silent and deadly, cutting through the rebels with surgical precision. Dax fall back. Mara's voice rang through his comms. "We've got your extraction route ready." But it was too late. The wraiths were closing in fast, and the team was surrounded. Dax was forced to make a split-second decision. Everyone to the secondary exit. Now. The rebels sprinted through the complex's twisting corridors, narrowly avoiding the wraiths' traps. Dax knew they couldn't hold them off forever. The charges had been set, and the clock was ticking. Back on the Erebus, the final moments of the battle were upon them. The Varnock fleet was breaking apart under the concentrated firepower of Mara's forces, but the real victory was being fought below. The first explosion rang out as the reactor core detonated. Cyphrax's surface shuddered, and the sky lit up with fire. The shockwave of the blast rippled through space, sending a tremor through the fleet. "Mission complete," Aiden reported, his voice filled with grim satisfaction. "Cyphrax is ours." As the Varnock fleet fell into disarray, Mara allowed herself a moment of relief. But she knew this was only the beginning. Cyphrax had fallen, but the war was far from over. The rebellion had a long road ahead, and the Varnock would stop at nothing to crush them. But today they had won. And the galaxy had seen that humanity, and the newfound alliance, were forces to be reckoned with. And Mara would lead them into the storm.